Okay, hi everyone, welcome. My name is Henry Gordon Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Agritecture. If you haven't heard of Agritecture yet, I'm happy to tell you a bit about us. We're a global services and software company. We're based in New York City, but we work around the world and we advise on all things data, strategy, and design related to vertical farming and greenhouses, controlled environment agriculture more broadly. But one of the things we've been doing since the beginning, since 2011, is blogging and reporting about the sector, about urban agriculture, vertical farming, greenhouses, and we've been sharing knowledge about that a lot. So if you haven't dug through our website to see our numerous thousands of blog posts over the past 10 years, definitely encourage you to check them out. You can search by topic that you're interested in. And one of the things we do a lot is we host webinars. And today's webinar is done in partnership with Montel, which you'll hear a little bit about later today. And we're very excited for their support in our mission to share knowledge broadly across the globe related to this exciting sector. And today's topic is going to be about CEA vertical farming in Europe specifically. We want to dive into what's unique about that market, what's exciting about that market, and we're really going to learn from a variety of different voices today about the European market. Just a little bit of Zoom etiquette. So introduce yourself on our group chat. I see the group chat is blowing up right now, so I need to catch up in there. It seems to have been activated, which is great. It'd be great to know where you're tuning in from. If you want to tell us a bit about your organization, that's awesome. Before we begin, just set your intention for the event. What do you really hope to learn today? Make sure you're taking notes if that's something you do. And definitely use the Q&A feature if you have questions for our panelists. We'll answer some of those live at the end, and we'll also be able to answer some of them in writing. And you can also follow up with us. We try our best to make sure you're getting the most value out of this webinar. So again, thank you so much for joining this Agritecture and Montel webinar on vertical farming in Europe. So I'll kick things off a little bit. Although I sound like an American Yankee, it's just because the schools I went to, I'm actually European. My father is from Great Britain and my mother is from the Czech Republic. So I grew up in a European household. I actually lived in Europe from the age of 10 until 18. And my parents today live in the Czech Republic and I go there often. So for me as a European, this topic of how controlled environment agriculture is different in Europe is fascinating to me. There's such a unique context of geography, agriculture, production, energy, all these various aspects. The interest of sustainability is different from North America and other parts of the world. Agritecture typically works in North America, Europe, and the Middle East, with a little bit of work in Asia. So a lot of my comparisons today will probably come from comparing to North America and the Middle East, where I work a lot. So let's get into some introductions. Let's see who are these amazing panelists that are joining us today for this discussion. Let's actually begin with you, Kevin, if you want to kick us off. You're representing Montel today, is that right?
I am, yep. Representing Montel. My name is Kevin Biernacki. I am currently reside in Las Vegas, Nevada. I've been in the started in the cannabis industry, kind of primarily started out in that industry. I've been in that for 20 plus years. Started up in Humboldt County, spent about almost 13 years up in Humboldt County, and kind of going down that avenue as the state started legalizing. Moved to Las Vegas when it became legal, and helped open up one of the first cultivations that was vertical farming and all LED lit. So we were kind of a test group, as you will, to how LEDs were going to change the market, and we were kind of the guinea pigs. We spent a lot of time working on trying to perfect the LEDs and what was right with them, what was wrong with them. Yeah, and so been in this market for a while, and currently have some projects working on in Malta, have one working on in Thailand. So we're definitely excited for the European market to really open up.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Kevin. We're looking forward to hearing your thoughts on cannabis as well and vertical farming in the European market, and a little bit about that project in Malta. Let's go over to you, Nicole. I've seen you on the speaker circuit and at the events, vertical farming around the world for several years. Can you tell us about you and what you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me. First of all, thanks for the invite. It's a real pleasure to be on this panel and kicking off. So yeah, Henry, as you said, I have been kind of in this industry for, gosh, 5, 6, 7 years now, 7, I think. My name's Nicole, and I'm co-founder and director of Cultinova. We're IoT solutions provider, hardware and software sensing, control, and software solutions for CA. I'm also on the advisory board of UK Urban Agritech Collective and former vice chair of the Farm Tech Society. So I think I've got a pretty good handle on the European story.
Great. We might ask you some policy questions there.
Ooh,
and,
no.
And Zeina, you're also in the UK, right? If I believe.
That's right. Thanks, Henry. And thanks very much for inviting me to speak today. So my background, I'm an independent consultant. I've spent most of my career actually on the retail side of things. So I was a retail buyer for nearly 10 years in the UK with a specialism in fresh produce. I'm a little bit of a newbie, I suppose, when it comes to CEA. I've spent the last 5 years working in this industry, where I gained experience working as a co-founder and director at Liberty Produce. So learning about lighting technologies and growing systems there. But now back to independent consulting and trying to really bring those two arms of my experience together. So bridging that gap between the tech providers and growers, right the way through to the retailers and the end consumer. So hopefully I can provide a little bit of perspective on that today.
Fantastic, Zeina, I appreciate that. And Fred, over to you. Are you in the Netherlands right now?
Yes, good day. My name is Fred Ruijgt. I am the business development manager for indoor farming for the company Priva. At this moment, I'm in Holland. I'm traveling quite a lot indeed. Working for Priva, we are a climate control solution company for the horticulture industry, for building automation, and for the best of both worlds when it comes to indoor farming, in a nutshell.
Fantastic. So let's dive in with the first question. And to our audience members, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A chat and we'll try to get to them and answer those. And so make sure you give us the best questions because we'll pick the best ones first. But let's talk about Europe. You know, Europe is interesting because it's quite different, right? I mean, so it's, even though it's quite small geographically, there's a lot of variety in culture, there's different economies, there's different agricultural systems. So it's quite interesting from that sense, but I'd be really curious to ask you all, what are some of the differences that are happening in the sub-regions of Europe? What's happening in the UK that's different from continental Europe, South, Central, and North? It'd be great to hear your perspectives and some of your observations on that. And again, our focus today is really vertical farming as this hot emerging way of producing. And how is vertical farming manifesting itself in different sub-regions in Europe? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll start with, I think that the European market, obviously it's set to explode. Globally, I think currently we're looking at, they're talking about a $30 billion market, poised to go to 60 billion by 2026. So it's a huge emerging market. That's kind of some statistics that they're looking at. I think that obviously, in the cannabis industry, as far as, what I'm cited to, Germany is looking to be poised to be a dominant powerhouse, generally just speaking by their geographical location, being kind of central and their population. They're looking at being pretty much a powerhouse in that region. Just getting all their documents together, getting all their legislation together. We're probably still looking at, unfortunately, best case scenario, 6 months, but, probably looking at more almost a year down the road before they get all their cannabis regulations put together. So we'll see how that plays out. I think Malta's kind of leading that charge at the moment. And I think everyone's just sitting back waiting to see how Malta, navigates this. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
And Kevin, are you mostly getting requests for I know what Montel does is mostly vertical, but are you getting requests mostly for vertical cannabis? Is that the hot way to approach that in Europe in these markets, or are they also looking at greenhouses based on your conversations?
I've seen mostly you're looking at indoor, from what we're looking at right now, and going vertical. Obviously, vertical is your space saving. You're looking to try and do your best footprint. for the price of project you're looking at or the size of the square footage you have to use. We're looking at, I think Europe right now is just kind of emerging on the cannabis market because it's so new. And the United States is kind of slowly stabilized in the cannabis market at the moment. So many states have opened up that we're seeing a big surge for cannabis in the European market, and we're seeing a big surge in the microgreens and food market for the US. So it's kind of it's got a little bit of a flip there. So I think that you're looking at a very large cannabis scene coming on to the European market here over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, right? Because if we look in the US cannabis production, whether it was under the radar or now above board, but it drove a lot of innovation for controlled environment agriculture, drove a lot of innovation around the lighting and a lot of the controls for these systems, which, you know, you could argue has reduced the cost or in the least provided new technologies for operators. What do you think, Kevin? Is that also going to be a bigger catalyst for Europe? I mean, Europe has a little bit more. I just want to stay on this cannabis vertical farming question a little bit longer, but do you think that's what's also coming? Do you think this is going to drive reduced costs in vertical farming in Europe as a result of the influx of cannabis production?
Well, it's hard to say. You know, it's hard to say how everybody. I think one of the challenges that Europe has is just getting rid of that international issue with everything's. I'm trying to think of the word for it, but you know, everything has a kind of an international treaty is basically that has banned cannabis, and they kind of have to work around that. You know, the way Canada did that was, you know, they just kind of went head on against it, and even Russia came out opposing it, but they just went for it, and nobody said anything about it. Who's policing it? Which is one of those challenges I think a lot of people are having with it right at the moment. But I think as it emerges, I think you're going to see, like I say, you know, obviously Germany being a powerhouse, but I think Spain and Portugal and Thailand, they're all coming online, and they're all pretty much heading down that avenue. And I think you're going to see the cannabis market really explode over the next 2 years.
Interesting. So Zeina and Nicole, I kind of want to tackle the UK if we can, right? Because it's its own beast. It's actually, you know, Brexited the European Union. So we're welcoming you back into this European-focused conversation today. But it's because it's a really interesting market. You know, there's a lot of shifts that have happened in demand and supply as a result of Brexit. Can you tell us a bit about what makes the UK unique from a vertical farming perspective today? Anyone can go first.
Sure. I mean, I guess from my perspective, that we're seeing a lot more investment in the market over these last few years. We've seen some really big projects. Just recently, Grow Up Farms have received investment of about £100 million for a really large scale project in the UK. You're seeing the likes of IGS getting support as well, and also exporting that technology. So I think the UK has become a really exciting place for vertical farming from a production perspective and from a technology perspective. I think the mismatch, and this is again coming from my perspective of the consumer side, is how do we distribute that downstream? Is there demand for it here? Would be my question. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, Nicole, do you want to add anything from a tech perspective or from a producer perspective? Do you agree with what I said?
I do agree. Yeah, you're making it difficult for me to answer and add things. Yeah, I think I totally echo what you said in terms of the investment landscape is there. Compared to some of the other maybe more conservative European countries, there is kind of the backing. I get the feeling there's also increased government backing as well. You know, there is a recognition that it does have a role to play, and I'd say another word, scale. I think there's a difference in terms of scale, the way that, you know, the large farms, large ventures, compared to some other European countries, which may be lagging behind a little bit, or maybe sort of focusing on R&D and into different crops. Maybe it's the diversity that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think probably where it differs to, you know, some of the projects Kevin is talking about is that cannabis isn't quite on the radar, I think, as much of some of these European countries. I think we're being held back by the legislation here. I think we've still got a way to go before we meet, you know, Germany and Malta and Denmark, for example, with regards to cannabis production in the UK. So yeah, I think definitely from a food perspective, vertical farming is taking off. It's taking off at scale. I think these recent months and with what's happening with the energy crisis, that's causing some reticence from an investor perspective, but hopefully that will be fairly short-lived. And, you know, in the next couple of years, we can start to see investment back up to where it has been in the last year or so, and expanding further as well.
There's definitely been a boom, you know, happening in the UK. There's no doubt about that. I mean, we've seen so many more companies, and we've seen the funding come in, as you mentioned. We've even seen some policy advancement. Nicole, what do you attribute that to? Like, what do you think is the main driver for the UK? Why is the UK, in the recent few years, really entered the scene as a leader in vertical farming?
I think it's a little bit the island thinking, you know.
Yeah, I think that's true.
There is that, you know, it's an island, and I've seen a few people from Singapore on there. You know, it's kind of this, this desire for self-sufficiency in a way. And you know, when COVID hit, we had empty supermarket shelves and queues and queues, you know, of lorries trying to get to the UK and to deliver our strawberries for Christmas, which you know, that was a real eye-opener to the general public. And I think that is certainly something that's you know, that's one of the push elements. Zeina, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my perspective, absolutely, I completely agree with you on that. I think for vertical farming to really fulfill its potential in the UK, we need to start looking at expanding the basket of goods that are available from vertical farms. It's not good enough for vertical farms to just be producing leafy greens or herbs or microgreens. You aren't going to be able to sustain these large scale investments. It's not what the population needs as a whole. We need, you know, high calorific goods. We need high value products as well. Even, you know, starting to embrace those products beyond food, I think would be a better option for many of the new farms that will be coming down the line.
Yeah, and I think it's cool, for example, that IGS is working on, you know, seed potatoes, and sort of starts to be a new complement to vertical farming to the wider food system, which I find very compelling and interesting. There's another way to move beyond leafy greens besides just growing another product for consumption. You can actually complement various parts of the food system or otherwise, or pharma and things that you mentioned. Fred, let's go over to you in the Netherlands. You know, the Netherlands is, you know, a greenhouse superhero, so to say, just massive from its productivity perspective, most of it under glass from what I've looked at. But, you know, why are vertical farms being built in the Netherlands?
Well, it connects to a couple of questions you asked already in regards to the pricing level or the demand or the COVID pandemic, so to speak. In this case, for Britain, it's never waste a good crisis. With COVID came, the vertical farming was lifted up, basically. So that's a good part. The thing is, if I may answer that one first quickly, yes, there is a demand, but it's also based on the price that the consumer wants to pay. So there's a very slippery slope in this case in the value of an indoor farm to be built in connection to the price of the consumers that wants to pay for it. That's still a very tricky one to say. Same goes for Holland in this case. We will be the last country in Western Europe where indoor farming will compete with the traditional greenhouse industry. The upside in this case is we have the potential to use R&D facilities to incorporate indoor farming into the growth cycle of crops. So we can induce more flowers when it comes to orchid. We can create better output material for tomatoes, for lettuces, whatsoever. So I think for indoor farming in Holland, and besides cannabis, because that's a whole different ballgame here, when it comes to food, we can incorporate indoor farming in the traditional greenhouse industry. That's my opinion in this case.
So I'd be curious, Fred, to hear your perspective about other parts of Europe that have a lot of greenhouses, right? So I think in the Netherlands, it's maybe 5,000 hectares. approximately of under glass. In Spain, there's 70,000 hectares of plastic greenhouses, producing a lot for Europe. I mean, do you think that vertical farming will play out in Spain? I mean, they have certain drivers like water issues and challenges related to that. Their heat in the summer is starting to get more extreme and more difficult. Do you see any growth in that market where we have greenhouses supplying so much of the produce?
I see potential. Let's start with Spain. There is an immense sea of plastics in the valleys there, growing crops under simple plastic tents or plastic tunnels. The next best thing is indoor farming. So there's nothing in between. Either you stay and be conservative or old-fashioned in this case, or you need to go upwards to indoor farming to create a steady and consistent food system with the nice output, consistent output, and the quality. And energy will be necessary to cool down either the greenhouses or the indoor farm. So there is a return on invest that could be the same eventually in the near future, I think. Yeah. The crops like cannabis, the high value crops, those are, well, a no-brainer is maybe too hard to say, but those will speed up the process initially.
Yeah, because those will fund a lot of the first projects, and the value of that product is so significant that the high capex of vertical farming starts to make sense to take those risks on.
Yeah.
So what about?
I need to take something into account in this case, and I think that Zeina already mentioned that one. The energy at this moment is sky high, so let's hope, or let's focus on the next year when the energy prices will drop a little bit to have another meeting in this case.
Yeah, we need to have another year that we can skip. I feel like we skipped 2 years with COVID, so we just have to have these like write-off years. But how many more can we handle? We're going to get into the energy crisis a little bit later, but let's continue our tour of Europe. What about Northern Europe? I mean, this is an interesting market. We've seen a number of vertical farming companies pop up in Northern Europe. What are some of the drivers there? Does anybody have an opinion on that? Why does it make more or less sense in Northern Europe?
Well, I think that each country in Europe has their own agenda when it comes to self-sufficiency. So local for local will be supported more and more by local governments. Northern Europe, they still have long winters without daylight or lesser daylight. So an indoor farm will help there to create the right settings and the right output, in combination with, in some of those countries, a lower energy price.
Yeah, they've got some interesting energy mix in the north, and they also do spend a little bit more on the import of product, right? So they pay a little bit more for leafy greens. So the business case does start to add up a lot more. I feel like in Central Europe, man, it's tough to produce in a vertical farm at any cost-effective way. And I was doing some comparisons. I think it's maybe like €9 a kg in some cases to produce in a vertical farm in Europe. In the US, I think it's closer to $7 a kg. So you've got higher, and that's not even accounting for the energy hike that's based on really last year. So lots of challenges there. Well, fantastic. Thanks for that little tour of Europe. We didn't cover everything, but I guess I will say in the Czech Republic, we recently saw the installation of the first in-store vertical farm. So I guess my observations on Eastern Europe is we're starting to see a lot of startups try to create innovations, try to get into the sector, something that we've seen in other parts of Europe, in the UK. I think it's just a few years behind, but it's great to see that enthusiasm and entrepreneurship and vertical farming that's happening all around the world now and in Europe as well. So, we talked about Europe being primarily dominated by greenhouses, but yet investors are putting huge amounts of money into vertical farms, not just in Europe, but around the world. But in Europe, we can look at InFarm. Obviously, it's a global company, but it's based in Europe, unicorn company, and raised a lot of money for European businesses. So, we're seeing European companies play the sort of Silicon Valley game in Europe, which is pretty rare, and be able to sort of cross that and raise a lot of money and have significant valuations. Some of the UK ones were mentioned as well. So, why are investors in Europe interested in this? And again, let's talk a little bit about what makes investors in Europe a little bit different from investors in the US. Any thoughts on that, Fred or Nicole, maybe?
Well,
Yeah.
I can say, I think, well, we can touch back on, what he was saying a little bit earlier is, I think you're looking at, this evolution of climate change. Climate's changing different everywhere, and for some places it's changing quite dramatically. And I think, going that indoor option kind of really stabilizes your environment so that you don't have to deal with the long, harsh winters or or some of the heat changes that are coming along. I think a lot of investors are seeing that, going indoor and going vertical, able to control your climate a little more precisely. And I think that's probably one of the driving factors.
Okay, so year-round production control. I mean, we've got year-round production in the Netherlands, so it's the consistency of that that's appealing. Anything else? Like, why else are investors excited about this in Europe? Nicole, you were going to say something?
I think there is an element. First of all, it's hugely diverse. The investment landscape in Europe, some have got more venture capitalists financing, and others are maybe more conservative. So that is one thing, just to pick up on the diversity. And I think it's just multiple factors, really. Playing into this investment interest. A little bit, I think, is also a bit of a hype, and kind of the FOMO, so the fear of missing out.
Yeah.
I think there is, to be honest, a little bit of an element there as well. And it's just sheer excitement of something new. It's tech driven. It's sexy. That I think there is that as well. But I think it's changing. I mean, Henry, you wrote a really good article about this, the maturity and the what was it called? The
trough of disillusionment and the Gartner hype cycle.
That is something where it's interesting. There's going to be interesting movements and diversity, even more diversity in the market. And I think more patient capital is going to come in. The landscape is changing. Investor confidence will build. It's probably taking a little bit of a dip now because of the energy crisis and because of the political crises that we've got in Europe at the moment. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting space.
Yeah, I think the FOMO thing is really important. It's like such a significant and powerful psychology in a number of ways. I mean, I remember if I went to the Netherlands 7 years ago and you were talking about vertical farming, I mean, most of the Dutch would sort of laugh about it. Like, they're like, oh, that will never work. Like, it works in research facilities, works at small scale. That's not going to be a big business. But I think they started to feel some FOMO, not to speak for the Dutch, and sort of say, well, these farms are getting built. Like, people are actually building them, and we have so much tech and so much experience to offer these. So you're seeing companies like Priva have dedicated, vertical farming, indoor farming segments. You're seeing automation companies focus on it. You're seeing a lot of the Dutch, I think, driven by a bit of fear of missing out and seeing the opportunity to do that. So I think it's really interesting how the psychology of this vision we have for vertical farming, providing year-round, high quality, sort of resilient agriculture, is pushing us all to sort of go for innovate, including the investors. On the investor side, when I spoke to investors in Europe, again, 5-6 years ago, they would say, sorry, the carbon footprint of vertical farming makes it not interesting to us because investors are much stricter about, I would say, ESG in Europe than they are in the US. That's also shifted. Right now, it's more like they're trying to find the ways to do the analysis and to invest in figuring it out and finding the ones that are the most sustainable. So that's also shifted as they've seen capital go in and they want a piece of it. So that's interesting. So thanks for reading my article, Nicole. I will say, I think that, we still have to see, right? Like my prediction has been, I think, delayed a little bit because there continues to be these drivers that either pump up FOMO or pump up interest in the sector. So, I think that decline is happening, and I think the exciting stage of mergers and acquisitions is coming. But again, it remains to be seen if I'm right or wrong. So that the jury's still out, I think, about that one.
Certainly, the industry's growing up, I think.
Yes, they're just growing up.
Zeina, sorry,
yeah.
Henry. I was going to say, I think the push for the tech and the investment in the tech is super exciting. But fundamentally, if you're investing in a computer, you're still investing in a facility that is producing food. And I think that's forgotten a lot of the time. People get hyped up by the tech, but it's not necessarily the tech they're investing in. They're investing in a food factory, fundamentally, something that's built that's producing food. So you've got to, when you look at the economics of it, you've got to compare it to a similar type of business. It's not a tech firm. It's not a company that is not Facebook. It's quite different from that. So I think some of these investors are not going to get returns as quickly as they're expecting to, and that's potentially stalling. You need to have that kind of patient capital that Nicole was talking about before. We need a longer term view on this.
Yeah, there has to be a day of reckoning for that. I mean, farms valued as tech companies, right? And I think that also puts an interesting question. I'd be curious actually to ask you, Zeina. I think in the US, we're seeing a little bit of shifting where traditional farmers, like big farms, are actually moving into CEA. There was an acquisition of Taylor Farms, which was a hydroponic greenhouse by one of the large field producers. And I've been thinking about that a lot. I'm like, okay, well, if the field growers get into CEA, they've got the strongest retail relationships. Do you think anything like that could happen in Europe? I mean, that would really change the game for a lot of these entrepreneurs and startups, because if field growers said, hey, we actually have a CEA line of products now, that'd be very hard for the retailers, not to go for that or not to prioritize that relationship that has 20 years, 40 years of contracts. What do you think about that? Do you think that will happen in Europe as well, Zeina?
I think we're seeing a split. So I think we're seeing some companies that are long-term major producers of field crops or glasshouse crops or a combination of both that are moving in that direction for specific crops. So for example, some leafy green type crops. I think we've got other producers that have committed to a line, a route, an investment in terms of their ways of operating, which mean that they're just never going to look at it. And I'm not sure which ones are going to win yet. I think we need a mixture of both. So I've talked to a lot of old school growers that have no interest. They've got a really good handle on their own investments, on their own ways of working, and they're just not interested. They can't see the future in vertical farming, maybe in certain elements of their supply chain, for propagating or something, but not for their whole growing cycle. And then we've got other growers that have gone in 2 feet with a facility. So I think there's a couple of different routes being taken by some of those longer term growers at the moment, some of those old school growers.
Fred, when it comes to the greenhouse growers, which Priva works with most of them, what do they think about vertical farming? I mean, what are their predictions? What are their feelings? Would they invest? Or is it going to be something similar to what Zeina mentioned, where it's sort of complementing their greenhouse operation, which they already probably do a little bit of that? I'm just curious what their perspective is, if you could speak for them.
Well, I can try, but hopefully I will not. I'll make it home alive safe. I think you were spot on by saying that the Dutch greenhouse industry were preaching that it will not work in Holland because of the acreage of glasshouse already. I think it's right. That's correct. However, I think incorporating indoor farms in your business is worthwhile at some point. Not sure if we are already done with R&D for that case to commercialize it, but I think they will embrace indoor farming as a part of the growth cycle of the total crops. I think that will happen, definitely. In regards to the investors that I see here, basically worldwide, is also investing in food is one of the best ways to invest, because food is already needed on a daily basis. 3 times a day you need some food. The thing is that the investors, and not the FOMO investors, but the long-term with patience, they can invest in food in general. And that starts from seeding company onwards to the grocery stores in which the food is being sold. And if a part of that is the basket of produce, if that's correct, then you have the whole line in your hands as an investor. And I think that's the best way, in my opinion, to go forward when it comes to investing.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you for that. So let's move into the current, situation, elephant in the continent. I don't know, but the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the crisis related to that and the cutting off of gas has led to an energy crisis. We're seeing really a month from now, it's going to be hitting everyone. I mean, everybody's preparing for it already, but once it's already starting to get cold, and once it gets colder, it's really going to be difficult. And I've seen some data, it's going to be 10 times the price in many cases, not to mention just concerns with supply. So Fred, actually, if we can stay with you a little bit, like how are, for example, the Netherlands as a greenhouse capital, how are those greenhouses powered for people that don't understand it? How are they, what kind of energy mix do they require? Let's just start there.
Yeah, let's say that the mid or high-tech greenhouses, they are working with grid electricity as a backup. Usually they have a CHP or a cogen generator to provide electricity and carbon dioxide and warmth or heat by using gas. And that's the most tricky part, because the gas contracts, you can block a gas contract for some years, but those will expire eventually. And there are a lot of greenhouse companies here at this moment, they're struggling with the high gas price, while their cogen generator will not be able to work, while there will be no electricity, there will be no carbon dioxide. So they need to make a choice. Do I replant my crop, or do I sit it out? And that's a very tricky part at this moment in Holland. I hear a lot of stories about greenhouse companies who are just laying out for the next quarter, not replanting their crops. And that's going to be very tricky because, well, I hope the banks will be helpful there as well. But that's the debate at the moment.
Yeah, you lose customers, you might lose employees. It's a very, very difficult decision. I guess I'm just curious to hear from you all. We didn't talk about it in detail, what you think, but how do you think this is going to play out? I mean, I go in my mind a lot about whether this is going to be good or bad for vertical farming, for example. Vertical farming, powered by electrical energy, may have an opportunity to showcase itself as, a gas-free or gas-less way of producing, which is, even though there's such high energy demand. But the energy crisis is not just affecting gas, it's affecting a lot of other energy types too, as that constraint on the entire system accelerates. So do you think, are we gonna see a slowdown in vertical farming? Because I guess another factor of this, just to add to the question, is vertical farming tends to produce a more premium product, right? So that product also means that consumers who are paying more for their energy during the winter might be less interested in buying premium leafy greens. So a couple things, do you think consumers are going to buy less leafy greens this winter in Europe, or premium leafy greens and premium crop products from vertical farms? Do you think their priorities are going to shift, and that will affect sales for vertical farming, which will create a bit of a slowdown for the sector most likely? Do you think that there's going to be more vertical farms built, or some shifting from gas-powered greenhouses to vertical farms as a result of this energy crisis? And what else? What else do you predict? What does your crystal ball say? Anybody can go.
Sure. I mean, I guess we need to be honest about the fact that the impact of gas prices, the invasion, of Russia into Ukraine, and gas price impact as a result of that actually influences all food production. We're not just talking about vertical farms, not just talking about greenhouses, we're talking about all food production. We need that energy for producing fertilizers, for soil preparation, for petrol and diesel to power the transport of those goods up and down the countries and around the world. So I think to just focus on vertical farming and greenhouse production is probably being a bit limited in our scope. I mean, in the UK, I think only this week I read that inflation on food is now up at 12.4%. So I think we need to be realistic about the fact that this is affecting every single industry, not just the one that we happen to work in. I think the impact of that will be that consumers in general will be cutting back. They're already cutting back. Again, I read again this week that apparently now Aldi, which is obviously a discounter supermarket, is now the 4th largest supermarket in the UK, which has never happened. So it's steadily moving up the ranks, and we're seeing more people move shop down into these lower price brackets because the price of living is really hitting them hard. So I think that is going to impact these higher purchase items in their basket. So in terms of the vertical farm produce, which is going to attract that premium, I think it is going to have a hit on those products.
Super interesting and good reminder that these energy prices affect the whole food system. Thank you for that. But I think that makes me think that vertical farming potentially has a more stable source of energy, a more stable source of supplies and inputs. And that's one of the business cases for it, is the consistency that's possible in that. So maybe it will have a step up in some sense, as people don't want to deal with those fluctuations as much, because at least you can predict what it's going to cost you, and at least it's getting more consistent in that sense. It's one of the benefits. And Kevin, what do you think about this really big question, and what are your predictions? Are you moving to Malta?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, you know, it's a complete unknown. We're just stepping into a place where we have no concept of what's really going to happen around the corner. Because we don't even know what's going to happen with a lot of the problems going on in the world right now. You know, what direction they go and how things turn out. So it's a tough question to answer. But like she said, you know, it's going to affect all prices. And you know, your electrical price, you know, everything's going up. Food prices going up, and consumers are looking at trying to spend less on food. You know, they are shopping around for, you know, cheaper value, better value for what they're getting. So some of this high-end food stuff, you know, it's still going to have its market, but I think you know, you're going to have definitely consumers looking to shop around a little bit lower prices. So it's hard to say, you know, it's hard to say where it goes.
Do you think that reduction, we seem to agree that people are going to be watching their wallet in the middle class and lower class, right? So do you think that's going to have an effect on vertical farms that are really dependent upon proving their sales numbers to get that return on investment, right? Like that's the big question, right? These investors taking risks on them. They've funded heavy CapEx facilities. But if that cash flow isn't there, if they're not able to sell product, that is kind of the end of it, right? So I'm just curious what you think.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, we're going to go back to the FOMO, you know, the people who are just jumping in as fast as they can and throwing a lot of money into it. You know, they may not fare as well as some of your investors that have the ability to weather a storm. And I think that's kind of the key. You know, you really need to be able to weather storms. And if you're prepared for them, you know, you'll survive them. But you know, we have a stormy path ahead of us right at the moment, you know, at least for the short term.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting about FOMO is there's like a reverse side of it. And that's kind of what the article goes through is like you sort of hype something up too much. And then when there's typical risks of unforeseen events or things that happen and the performance starts to go down, everyone sort of wants to get out. And that's like, unfortunately, our human nature, you know, and then you sort of stabilize. So I'm just wondering whether like I'm still digesting what kind of catalyst this is going to be, because we've seen typically for vertical farming, various crises have actually driven more interest into vertical farming. So anybody else want to share thoughts, Nicole or Fred, on what do you think, how you think this is going to play out over the next 12 months?
Yeah, I've kind of got a question back to throw back at Zeina about, you know, do you think the consumer, like if you take the UK supermarket, do you think they're actually aware of whether their food is grown or produce is grown in a greenhouse, or in a vertical farm, or, you know, do people? Because I remember you telling me stories about people not believing where their tomatoes came from. So do you think that's changed?
I'd like to think it has, but I don't think it has, not in the UK at least. I think people have very little education. I don't think producers and retailers do a good job in educating people on the benefits of their products. And I think that although I believe in the concept of vertical farming and the benefits that can be delivered to consumers and to the whole supply chain of those products produced in those types of environments, I think we need to find a really good way to clearly communicate some of those benefits, be it around sustainability, be it around shelf life, be it around quality, availability, consistency, any of those things that actually create tangible value down the supply chain. Currently, I don't feel that they exist or are communicated very well at all.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And I think there's one other really important aspect, which, you know, currently might make those people pay a premium, those who can afford to do so, and that's the organic element. And in Europe, we are still struggling to reconcile vertical farming and organic because of the lack of soil. So, you know, if we grow things in hydroponics, so without soil, we can't get organic certification. So this is something, you know, even though we may be able to grow completely without pesticides, it's still you know, it's still a major drawback. And I think that is something where people have been willing to pay more. And, you know, with rising inflation, and I think there is going to be a slowdown, definitely.
Okay. Nicole, do you think that creating a label for indoor farming will help then?
That's a mean question, because I've kind of been working on that for ages. I think it possibly would, but it's like Zeina said, it's a long process, it's a journey, it's a learning process, it's a communication outreach, you know, process. It's proving that it's better, proving that it's different. I think it would certainly help communicating the sustainability elements, but doing so honestly. So having, you know, the sort of validated data, you know, avoiding greenwashing, being transparent about where food has come from, you know, where it's grown, under what conditions, and irrespective of whether it's grown in open field or greenhouse. Or I think the consumer will want to know that at some point, you know, want to know what they're paying for. And just, there are various attempts across the globe to come up with a CEA label, or vertical farming label. I think it's got to be, what worries me in this regard is that they're kind of disjointed, fragmented efforts again. You know, nobody is kind of pulling this together, and if we have too many labels, at the end of the day, they might be worthless. So, you know, for something to be meaningful, it's got to be sort of a global approach, but taking into account the regional differences.
Thanks for sharing that. Oh, sorry, Fred, go ahead.
No, it's Kevin.
sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, it's actually kind of funny. The US just announced just several days ago that they're going to have a new food label that's just going to be a red light, yellow light, green light on the front of your packaging, where red light's going to be something that's going to have a lot of sugar, maybe not good for you. Green light is something that's good for you. Yellow, obviously, somewhere in the middle. And I'm curious to how that's going to play out, because it's going to make it kind of mindless. You just look at the green light, you grab it, and it's good for you. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, how people really take to that, and trying to keep it a little less mindless, I guess.
We have that already, Kevin, in Europe, or at least in the UK. We already have that system with regards to fat, sugar, and salt on the front of packs, so you can see whether you're selecting all greens or a couple of greens and yellow. And I mean, it's taken a long time. I don't know how many years that system would have been in place, but probably at least 10, maybe longer than that. And even over that time, I think it's probably people are now used to it and will select packs based on that traffic light system. But I think Nicole's point back to how you communicate and what you communicate, is it about locally produced? Is it about sustainability? And then how do we standardize that approach across all the different farms is a really tricky one, and also different levers for different customers. So, you know, you talk about vertical farming to some consumers and they think it's like Frankenstein foods. They don't like the idea of their food being produced in a factory, for example. They expect all of their produce to come from open fields, which is not how we produce food currently anyway. Generally, you know, a lot of times a lot of our produce comes from glasshouse. So I think it's a really big piece of work that needs to be undertaken, but I think it will help.
So amazing, thank you so much. And it's really important point that we need to differentiate the product for it to be valued. And I guess it's interesting in this period of crisis in Europe to see, you know, whether that's going to be delayed and how that will play out. What I want to do next, because we have a very engaged audience, thank you everyone for listening. We have a lot of good questions, as I want to get into some rapid fire Q&A. So this first one from Galina is really about the crop variety perspective. And so, you know, there's obviously a lot of discussion about diversification of crops. I would say strawberries are the next one that's attention grabbing. Do you think that the development of new varieties for vertical farming is going to continue to proceed in Europe? Do you think it's very important in the European context, or do you think that's also just sort of going to be slowed down through this crisis? What do you think, Zeina, with the crop focus? You talked about diversity.
Yeah, I think we need a broader range of products, certainly from a consumer and retail perspective for the market. But I think also developing new varieties that are very specific for vertical farms will allow people to become more efficient with their production, allow us to get better yields, and allow for farms to be more profitable. So I think it's a really important piece of work, and I think it will happen. And I think seed houses are getting on board with that.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of R&D for these companies as they are sort of managing commercial operations and sale of their leafy greens, and they have to also develop commerciality and a profitable version of growing strawberries. So I'm curious, I think this will probably slow down some of that crop diversification as they probably have to consolidate and focus through this crisis a little bit. What do you think, Kevin, about small scale vertical farming? I know you work on a range of projects at Montel, but what do you think the potential for small scale vertical farming is in Europe, for example? These could be, ones that are retail based. They could be ones that are, just boutique based ones. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, Europe is gonna probably follow the same thing, same kind of structure that the US has seen. We've seen, obviously the cannabis industry kind of really spark the whole indoor concept and vertical growing, and we've kind of seen the transformation there. And now we're seeing that transformation into a lot of small vertical facilities that grow locally, so they can have fresh food direct, without being shipped. Here in the US especially, we're getting stuff shipped in from all over the place. And so your food might be 3-4 days old before it even hits the shelf. And you're seeing a lot of people, really wanting to get that market fresh, So we're seeing facilities open up a lot in the US that are small scale. And I think we'll see the same for Europe. I think, it'll follow the same suit.
Yeah, basically solves a different purpose. My recommendation is to just definitely think about what's the problem you're solving and the customer and how many of those customers. You don't have to build a mega, huge global business if you don't want to. You can actually build a profitable, smaller business that's growing something unique. We've seen that example proven in the US. So definitely worth a try. But it's really a question of what you, the entrepreneur, wants to do, right?
Yeah, man. And we're seeing so many of these small microgreen facilities and small lettuce facilities, and they're doing really well, on that small scale, because it's personalized, it's local, it's fresh, and I see that as being a very viable market, especially people who are able to get into a career field that's changing what they've been doing in the past. They can do a small scale operation, right, without big capital behind them. So I think it's something that's appealing to a lot of people, and I think you'll see it kind of explode.
Over to you, Fred. There's a question about crops, right? So besides cannabis, what are some of the crops that you think are the most valuable for CEA operators to grow? There's a lot of crops that are grown in greenhouses that are sort of commodities. You see vertical lines with leafy greens. Anything you've seen that's really interesting and you think people should dig deeper on?
Obviously, the strawberries are upcoming, so that's the next best high-value crop, I assume. There are some other medicinal plants, not being cannabis, that could be worth investigating as well. They still have some high value there. But I think it's also bound to the location of the farm you're going to build. For instance, heart of Saudi Arabia, if you want to have local produce and you want to have cherry tomatoes in place, you don't have a traditional way of growing them. So there needs to be high-tech involvement to create a year-round cherry tomato turnover or offtake. So those are worth an incentive as well to have a year-round steady supply of those specific crops.
Yeah, really interesting. I think the strawberries are definitely the area to focus, or even other berries are being explored. It's because it's a product that's really going to wow you, right? It tastes delicious. If it's fresh, it's going to make a difference. You're probably willing to pay a little bit more, at least consistently, for something that tastes great like that. And there's just so many bad strawberries out there that it's really nice to get a good one when that happens. Nicole, going over to you, sorry for the policy question, but do you think policy in Europe, maybe it's an easy answer, but I think policy in Europe is up to speed with vertical farming? Is it being supportive? Is it at the right pace for this?
No, not yet.
That's
my very, very simple answer. It's being recognized slowly. interestingly, I think it was Lombardy in Italy, that's actually formally recognized urban agriculture, and I think vertical farming was actually named in there. I remember, Zeina, I think we put something in for the UK food strategy together, didn't we, with UKUAT, and we're disappointed to see that the food strategy did not.
Yeah, that was disappointing. That was one of the questions here too.
Yeah. Did not in the first round. I think they may have changed it now, where they did give vertical farming a mention at least, but it was like one paragraph. But having said that, I think this is changing. The interest is there. We've got the European Green Deal on the other hand, and that does, I think at the moment, goes through thousands of revisions still, but it does kind of hint towards vertical farming. If you look at the importance of regenerative agriculture, and also biodiversity, you could argue that through vertical farming you're freeing up land, so the land can regenerate and give more space to biodiversity. So there is this discussion that we've been having with representatives from the European Union as well. So it's interesting. I think it's just a massive challenge if you take the European Union with its diversity. Then you've got Europe as the continent/island mentality as well. So it's just so diverse that I think policy is lagging behind, but we really need to drop red tape also in terms of, recognition of novel foods, for example. All of these regulations do still constitute a stumbling block. But just to go back to what Kevin said very briefly, if I may, regarding the opportunities for decentralized and small-scale farming, I think, Henry, this might be something that could, prove resilience now in this current crisis. Something that, smaller scale might work better than large scale in terms of the energy question and investment slowdown.
Yeah, I think definitely you might see a number of those start up, and we're seeing a rise of urban farming in generally globally as a result of food prices increasing. So I think it'll be interesting to see whether people actually attempt more smaller or community scale versions of these. There are a number of questions for schools related to this. It's going to be interesting. I think that there's going to be both moving forward and moving backwards. So I think it's just an evolution is what we expect. Lots of great questions from our audience. There's a couple that were consistent, so I'm going to try and answer those a little bit in a moment. But first, as we sort of wrap up this webinar today, and I want to thank all of our speakers, I also want to thank Montel, who has been supportive of this and various other webinars. We've been sharing knowledge, and this one in particular about Europe. And Montel is a racking solutions provider for vertical farming, and it's mobile racking, so it can move on wheels, it can be automated and save you a lot of time and growing space, which is obviously an important asset. And they've got installations all around the world now, and they've been quite successful in both cannabis and in food production, and Agritecture is proud to be able to assist them. You can reach out to them here. You can contact Kevin and you can get in touch if you want to know what Montel can do for you. And just to add to that, Agritecture software, Agritecture Designer answers a lot of the questions that were asked about energy, about water, about labor, about pricing. We feature partners like Priva and Montel on that software. So as you finish your plan, you can actually request quotes and you can work with some vetted suppliers as well. So there were a lot of questions about does small scale work? There's a lot of questions about the costs. There's a lot of questions about different pieces of equipment, etc. You can model out your farm, you can do your market research, you can plan that all online and work with amazing partners like Montel and Priva. I want to give a big thank you, virtual round of applause to Zeina, Nicole, Kevin, and Fred. You all were awesome as we talked about this challenging topic, and I hope people reach out to you on LinkedIn and connect with you. You've got some amazing people here with a lot of knowledge from Europe. So thank you to all of our attendees, and thanks so much to our panelists. Take care, everyone.